This is the Jerry Doyle Show.
We've been through a terrible recession, the worst that we've seen since the Great Depression. And this recession was the culmination of a decade that fell like a sledgehammer on middle-class families.
President Obama today pandering in Menominee, Wisconsin. He was at ZBB Energy Corporation talking about the lost decade, or the blame it on Bush decade. The culmination of a decade that felt like a sledgehammer on middle-class families. Well, if you're trying to rewrite history, I would say the president is being very successful in his efforts to undo the facts of what happened in the last decade. Not all things good under the Bush administration, but back in November of 2005, we were creating jobs at the clip of 215,000 a month. We were culminating 30-plus months of manufacturing expansion. Now, the Obama administration obviously wants to say that if you want to go back to the failed decade under George Bush, well, then have them take control of the House in the midterm elections. But the numbers were much different. And I went and looked at the unemployment numbers in Wisconsin for that entire decade. The numbers were in the 3s, 4s, and 5s. When the Democrats got the House and the Senate in 2006, and then the majority in 2008, the numbers have gone in the other direction, and Geithner's saying the unemployment numbers could go up before they go down. At what point do the Democrats stop blaming Bush, take responsibility for their failed policies? Discussing that with us on the program, Congressman Thaddeus McCotter, Michigan's 11th Congressional District, the Republican first elected in 2002, concentrating on manufacturing and small business. Congressman, welcome back.
Oh, thanks for having me back on, Jerry.
You know, we have this little montage I played for the audience earlier called Bush Happy Days. And he was talking about home ownership, and he was talking about job creation. He was talking about manufacturing. But this Democrat-controlled House, Senate, and White House trying to manufacture something much different than what that last decade was really all about. It's more about the creation of blame rather than taking responsibility and frightening people to think that if you guys get control of the House, that it's only going to go back to those dark, dark days of Bush and company.
Well, I think the president's not being very successful in this. As you know, Jerry, a lot of the things that he's talking about and placing the blame on started under President Clinton. Clearly, as you rightly pointed out, the Bush years were not perfect. No administration is. What the president's problem is that his highly centralized attempts to turn the American economy over to the federal government are having the exact opposite of effect of his intentions. It's injuring the ability of the United States to be productive. And so, having his policies failed, what he's trying to do is throw the shiny ball out there and have people look backward instead of looking at the present reality that the Democratic majority and this Democratic president fundamentally think that government is the font of our prosperity, and we all know that that's backwards.
Well, in listening to his comments today, he was using past tense terminology with regard to the damage that was done, whether it was 8 million jobs lost, 750 lost the month he was sworn into office, 3 million people lost their jobs by the time he took office. So it's if all the bad news right up until he put his hand on the Bible and was sworn in, that right up until then, everything was bad, 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 bad. But now that he's in and government's here to the rescue, that we can count on things getting better. But if Geithner says unemployment could go up before it goes down, does that not then at least mark a point in time where they have to take responsibility for policies that would cause the unemployment number to spike up rather than to continue to trend down?
Well, they've continued the job-killing policies of the Democratic majorities that were elected in 2006, and they've gone even worse, obviously, with their botched attempt at health care reform, which I think is going to be hurtful to the average American. I think that when you look at the cap and tax proposals they put forward, the willingness to raise taxes in a recession, and most importantly and most obviously, their trillion-dollar government stimulus bubble that did nothing but replace the housing bubble with one that we certainly can't afford as taxpayers. What they're trying to do now is, having failed in those attempts, he has nothing to put forward that's positive to show what they're going to do to create jobs, because, again, their fundamental premise is flawed. They think that everything that you have comes from Washington, and whatever you get to keep is through the kindness of some federal bureaucrat or some legislator. That's absolutely wrong. It's the American people who've created the most prosperous, equitable economy in human history, and they're the ones who want to get us out of this situation. So government has to stop making it more difficult for them to do so.
You can only fill a balloon up with so much air until it pops. Does this administration think that there's any constraints on the size and the scope of government, or is this just going to be the big government bubble that can expand forever, deficits and debt and fiscal irresponsibility be damned?
Well, we know that it can't, Jerry. You know that. I know that. The American people know it. The problem is this administration and the Democratic Congress don't. They called us back in August to pass $26 billion state government bailout, which was really the first sign that they know that even their $1 trillion stimulus bubble is running out of steam. So what did they do? They tried to put more air into it. It's fascinating to watch them because, in the end, all they have is the redistribution of wealth and a hope for the best strategy, and the American people know that it will not work. So the president has to go out there, try to recreate history. The American people aren't buying it. And either he delivers and the Democrats deliver or they don't. And again, their fundamental premise is flawed, and they're just simply making this worse.
Let me ask you this, Congressman. If you went walking through your district, Michigan's 11th congressional district, and you were knocking on doors and you said, look, I'll give you $50 if you vote for me, that would be illegal, would it not?
Yes, that would be illegal.
Okay, so what's the difference with an administration saying, here's $26 billion to the teachers union, here's an extension of 20 weeks of unemployment benefits, here's an expansion of, here's money for this. Is this not a bribe to get people to vote, and why is that not illegal?
Well, these are individuals who are inclined to vote for them anyways, but I think that what you're putting your finger on is this is all they have, is they have the spending, federal spending, which is out of control, as an attempt to try to prop up the economy heading into a midterm election. I think what you're also seeing, Jerry, is they're now starting to come up with the myth that Republicans are going to destroy Social Security, which I find particularly rich, coming from the party that just slashed Medicare. So what you're seeing is a very desperate party that has no real vision or focus for America because what they thought would work has failed. They're scrambling to hold on to power, and the American people are not going to be fooled.
We just passed the 75th anniversary on Saturday of FDR's signing of the Social Security Act, and now we see that unless there is an increase in the retirement age or a cap taken off the wages that are taxed at the 7.5, 15% round trip, that we're going to have to see generationally huge cuts in program payouts or increases in taxes to cover, but yet again, the Democrats seem to be data immune when it comes to the long-term viability of Social Security. And Obama's out there over the weekend saying that you guys want to destroy the Social Security system. How dare you suggest that people take a portion of their own money and be in control of their own financial future? How dare you? This from the very same people that created a flawed program to begin with.
Well, this was also a program that was put forward by President Bush. There were other ways to deal with it. And so not only are they blaming President Bush for things that he did, they're blaming him for things that were not done. And I think that, again, it goes back to the fact that the party of hope and change and look towards the future now has nowhere to go but look backwards and blame President Bush. And it's relatively ironic, Jerry, because all along we've known that their quote-unquote new policies for America were nothing but retread leftist policies from the 1970s. And so I think that one of the things we're seeing is that this is not a progressive party, because progress is measured in the expansion of human liberty and self-government. This is a regressive party of bureaucracy and big government dragging us back to the 1970s.
When you take a look at the total of Obamacare, the attempts that probably were seen with ramming through cap and trade, when you take a look at the hostile takeover of Chrysler, the forced marriage there with Fiat, the obliteration of the bankruptcy laws with regard to bondholders with General Motors, it would seem that, things that would be constitutional privilege, things that would be banking laws, all that stuff seems to be getting thrown out the window. And a government that, in my opinion, Congressman, looks to be running roughshod over certain principles, certain laws, and certainly the people, that in a certain way they seem to be willing to commit a sort of political suicide as long as they can get accomplished what they think needs to be done in the time that they know they have to do it.
Well, they do tend to act far more like a parliamentary democracy than as a constitutional republic. And their first option always seems to be to have the federal government do something. Again, we saw this with the $26 billion state bailout, which is only going to perpetuate the problem and make it harder for when the day of reckoning comes and this restructuring of the state governments has to come. So when you look at them, Jerry, remember, they're viewing themselves as the be-all and end-all Washington is not the last resort to these people. It's the first resort. And you and I both know that rarely winds up being beneficial to the American people.
When you, by the way, Congressman Thaddeus McCotter is with us, mccotter.house.gov, the website, Michigan's 11th Congressional District. When you have these across-the-aisle discussions, debates, when you're giving your floor speeches, I mean, we all see that televised on C-SPAN, and sometimes it's very entertaining. Sometimes it's rather boring. But when you have your little breakout sessions with members from the other party, has anybody ever just thrown out there, look, Thad, I don't know how long we can keep spinning the wheel or dancing, because sooner or later the music's going to stop. Is there any Democrat out there that you've come across that isn't in lockstep with this bigger government centralized planning kind of mentality?
Well, we don't have to rely upon me to give you the words that the Democrats use. Look, the health care vote was a bipartisan vote against it. It was a straight-line party vote for it, so there were Democrats that were willing to vote against it. The cap-and-trade bill that passed the House had Democratic votes against it. So what you see is there are Democrats who will cast votes for sanity and just try to slow the growth of this massive expansion of the federal government. And they're right there on record doing it. But there are also others who say that they are not on record as doing it.
Pointing out problems is one thing, and sometimes, I looked at this Mark Halperin piece about how you Republicans should stay away talking about the mosque at Ground Zero, stay away from talking about the possible meeting between the president of Iran and our president, that you need to concentrate on the economy and jobs and jobs and the economy and jobs. Is that an attempt to try and, again, link it to Bush, blame it all on Bush, but also to look at the negativity factor that's taking place out there? Mort Zuckerman today in the Wall Street Journal, the end of American optimism. Another piece in The Guardian talking about things are so bad out there that even the criminals are struggling. Is it an attempt to try and have people finally go, enough already? Problems are one thing. Pessimism is another. Solutions are certainly something that we need. What's the Republican solution to not just reigning in government, but turning around our financial ship of state, empowering small business, freeing up capital to have a job recovery rather than a jobless recovery? What's the first rule or action that the Republicans would embark upon, given the power in the House in the midterms?
Well, first, I think that as a country, we are a country in recession and a country at war. And I think those who say that members of the Congress should simply focus on the economy right now and let the president handle the foreign policy. Well, I'm glad that Ronald Reagan didn't follow that advice when he was taking over for Jimmy Carter. I'm glad that there were Republicans in the Congress that understood that the advance of communism in the 1970s was not an inevitability, and that we shouldn't just focus on the stagflation that the Carter administration brought us. So those people who tell us that foreign affairs no longer matters are part of the problem, not the solution. Now, fundamentally, what the Republican Party believes in is we trust the American people. We know that the strength and salvation of this country remains her free people, not her subservient government. So when we start talking about the issues of war and peace, I think the Republican Party is ready to come back in and start to show that American declinism is not something that's here to stay. It's back like in the 1970s. Those people who look at America as having her best days behind us are going to be sorely proven wrong. And the reason that the Republican Party is going to be able to do this again, Jerry, is that we don't think it's going to come from a bunch of politicians in Washington. We think of ourselves as servants facilitating the ability of the American people to take care of their own problems. We did this in our alternative to the president's stimulus, where we relied on deep tax relief for American workers and for American businesses so they could weather the storm and start hiring and growing the economy. We did this with the health care solutions we put forward, targeted ameliorative steps that empowered patients for patient-centered wellness, not some federal bureaucracy to make your decisions for you. We did it with an all-of-the-above energy strategy that's out there. We've already put the solutions out there. And in terms of foreign policy, we're never going to step back from our sworn responsibility under the constitutional oath we took to defend the United States and her people against all enemies.
Congressman, appreciate your time on the program. American declinism, I believe in American exceptionalism. I don't believe that this president necessarily believes that we're any more exceptional than any other nation out there. I know there's a lot of people that disagree, and I hopefully see those people show up at the ballot box, because attitude controls your altitude. Back from my old flying days, the right attitude can help to control the attitude. Right now, the attitude is that American is no better or worse than anyone else, and I think we certainly need to reorient our thinking in that area. Congressman Thaddeus McCotter, thanks for your time on the program. Check out his website, McCotter, MCCO2TSER.house.gov. Appreciate your time, Congressman.